Welcome to the Leadership Winston-Salem February Leaders in Lunch webinar. For those of you who might be less familiar with Leadership Winston-Salem, we are a nonprofit organization that works with approximately 100 community leaders each year to educate, connect, and energize them to serve and improve the community. Hosting webinars like this one is just one of the many ways that we educate our class members and stay connected to our alumni. At this time, I would like to introduce Shana Gregory. Shana serves as the Vice President, Human Resources and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer with Allegacy Federal Credit Union. As part of a dynamic team, Shana leads Allegacy's journey to create a culture of belonging by fostering employee engagement and overseeing all areas of Allegacy's human resources. Shana relocated to the Triad and joined Allegacy in 2018, bringing a diverse background in human resources and talent acquisition. Previously, Shana was a part of the human resources teams in government contracting, the Department of Commerce, and the Department of Justice, all in the greater Washington, D.C. area. Shana is active with the Winston-Salem Society of Human Resources Management, is a SHRM certified professional, earned her Bachelor's of Arts degree from Bucknell University, and recently completed her MBA at Wake Forest University. Welcome, Shana.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here today, and I'm excited to be joined by a dear friend of mine, Dr. Will Lewis, and have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Lewis to share with all of you today. So I know that Frida will share his formal bio. Excuse me, but I want to start by just introducing him as, a trusted DE&I colleague that I have had the pleasure of working with for the last 4 years. And I had the chance to meet Dr. Lewis in 2020 and work with him through Allegacy, but his background in DE&I goes far back beyond that. And, Dr. Lewis had his start in academia, and then really saw a need in the DE&I space to share more broadly. And we have the pleasure of learning from him as he is an author, a podcaster, a speaker, and as I said, a trusted friend. So thrilled to share the platform with you today, Dr. Lewis.
Shana, I am thrilled to be here. I want to thank Leadership Winston-Salem, the leaders and all their leadership for putting this on, letting us share this stage. And I'm just so happy. And Shana, you know what? As I share with you all the time, when I go on the road to speak, I would love for you to be there just to introduce me to the audience. I really appreciate it. Well, to everybody that's out there, I am so glad. Look, we're about to have some deep dialogue around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and very specifically what I'm calling the 10 considerations of DEI. I'm going to share a little bit of context. So I have some slides that I will share with you, and then Shana and I will engage in a conversation. She will ask me all types of questions. So a couple of things, housekeeping. If you have questions, you have a question and answer button down at the bottom of your page. Throw your questions in the question and answer column. And if you just have some general thoughts, general responses to the conversation, to what I'm going to share, put that in the chat function. I would love for us just to have an ongoing conversation with each other as I'm sharing with you the context. So let's get started. One of the first things I want to do to practice putting stuff in the chat function, put in the chat function your favorite dessert. Don't think about it. Just put it in the chat, your favorite dessert. I want to see what your favorite dessert is. Throw it in the chat function. Frida says tiramisu. Crystal says cheesecake. Nedra says pound cake. Brittany, coconut cream pie. Oh my goodness, ice cream, chocolate anything. Shana, you and I, give me a high five, Shana. Chocolate anything. That is, I love it. Calvin says sweet potato pie. Oh my goodness, Calvin, you must have read the book and you know something about the book, or maybe you don't. But I love sweet potato pie too. Cheesecake, walnut brownies. Oh my goodness. Peach cobbler. Then you're not peach cobbler. Oh my goodness. Ice cream. Any kind of ice cream, I'm assuming Aaron, absolutely good stuff. Good lemon blueberry cookies. Now that sounds delectable. My goodness, lemon blueberry cookies. I love it. Now you all are saying, well, William, why did you ask us to put in the chat function our favorite desserts? I'm gonna tell you why. Because I am a cookie monster. And because I love desserts, all types of desserts, I want to know what kind of desserts y'all like. So that, and what I should have asked you, I should have asked you to put in the chat function the recipes for your desserts. So I can go and begin to recreate the desserts that you put in the chat function. But thank you so much for just sharing with me your favorite desserts. And I really appreciate it. And I'm kind of hungry right now. And Danielle says it's a family recipe, it's a family secret. I get it. I understand. My mama's banana pudding is a family secret. She will not tell me how to make her banana pudding to this day. And so I get it. Now, here's the thing, y'all. I want to jump into some slides just for a couple of minutes, just to kind of share with us context as to when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We cannot look at it out of context. It's not something that's in a vacuum. And in today's world right now, what we're experiencing, there is a lot of context that we need to unpack as relates to DEI. So I want to take us there just for a moment, if you will. Can you all see my screen? If you can see the screen, give a thumbs up. Shana, I can see, you can see the screen. Excellent, awesome. 10 considerations for DEI for 2024. First thing I want you to do is to understand this. The demographic buying power. When we're talking about as businesses, nonprofits, organizations, we have to really understand and put the first things first. What's the first thing first? Our customers. First things first is when we think from a business perspective, customers. And here's the reality. There is some buying power. When we talk about buying power, we're talking about for different demographics in the United States, for example, Hispanic Latina, there's $1.9 trillion of buying power. African Americans, $1.6 trillion of buying power. Women, $5 to $15 trillion in buying power in the US. People with disabilities, $20 billion in buying power. LGBTQ, $3.7 trillion in buying power globally. So when people are talking about this diversity, equity, and inclusion, oh my goodness, it's divisive and it's all this, I want you to put the first things first. First thing first is that people of diverse backgrounds have some buying power, and as a corporation, organization, company, small business, nonprofit, you want to be able to engage with them and engage with their buying power. First thing first. So all the rhetoric that you hear, we need to put all that aside and look at what we're doing. And what we're doing is we're trying to tap into new markets. We're either going to strengthen existing markets or tap into new markets. That's what business is all about, right? So it's not no kumbaya. This is business that we're talking about, okay? Now, that said, let's look at this. As it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, the bubble has burst. So I used to talk about it in the there was an anti-DEI movement or anti-DEI legislation. That's still real. But when I zoom out and I look at everything for what it is, the bubble has burst as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's burst just like the housing market bubble burst, just like the .com bubble burst. In 2020, we had a global pandemic. And so in many ways, our health bubble burst and our economy bubble burst. DEI is no different than that. So to help you with a mental model, think about it as a bubble bursting within that context. Now, when a bubble bursts, that doesn't mean that everything has died away. That just means that we need to now begin to be a little bit more strategic and more innovative and begin to reimagine, because the housing market bubble burst, but we're still selling houses. We're still building houses. The technology bubble burst, but we still got technology. So just because a bubble burst doesn't mean it's dead. Elon Musk said that DEI is dead. DEI is not dead. If you look at Indeed right now, for vice president for diversity officers, you're going to see companies all the way from McDonald's all the way to small businesses that are hiring vice presidents for diversity, equity, and inclusion, belonging, accessibility. So it's not dead. The bubble just burst. Another thought for you. So there is a strategy. There is a strategy. This bursting of this bubble has happened through a kind of a very strategic approach. I was on the call last week with colleagues from all over the country, representing colleges and universities all over the country. And very specifically, one of our colleagues is in Nebraska. And she shared with us as they have begun to dismantle diversity in Nebraska, she shared with us kind of what's behind some of the strategy. One of the things that they're attacking, that's being attacked as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, is they're attacking precepts and principles related to equity. Precepts and principles related to equity. They're attacking, or they're misquoting civil rights leaders and leaders for change. So they're using, let's say, Dr. King's speech and the famous one that we know when he said, "Don't judge me by the content of, don't judge me by my skin color, but by the content of my character." They're misquoting that, taking it all out of context to justify dismantling DEI. They're describing DEI as indoctrination, and there is anti-DEI legislation that is happening across state governments and colleges and universities. And I want to speak very specifically to that. There's across the United States, 22 states have about 65 bills that are outlining diversity, equity, and inclusion at the state government level and also at the institutions of higher education in those states. There are about 4 or 5 things that they're looking at. They're looking at mandatory diversity training. So they're saying you can't do mandatory diversity training. You can't have diversity offices or officers. You can't have diversity statements, and they're prohibiting consideration of race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, sexual preference, and thought and identity within the context of the hiring process. And they're also they're looking at from the college admissions process. They're saying that you can't consider race in that as well. Now, let's look at very specifically North Carolina, because North Carolina is one of the 22 states. So write this down in the chat function, be like, oh my goodness, I didn't know. You may not have known, but now you do. North Carolina, our state bill 364. And so go look it up for yourself. Y'all don't take my word for it. Yes, I am your thought partner, but fact check me. Fact check me. Make sure I'm on right. North Carolina's State Bill 364 prohibits state government from compelling certain forms of employee speech. And basically what they're saying, if you go look at it, this is small print. So I have something here in red for you. And this piece right here says we have to refrain from soliciting or requiring an applicant for employment to describe the applicant's actions in support of or in opposition to the beliefs, affiliations, ideals, or principles identified in subdivision 1 of this subsection. So you're all asking me, well, William, what is subdivision 1 of the subsection? Well, here's subdivision 1 of the subsection. So again, small print, go look it up for yourself. But this is subdivision 1 of the subsection. And what they're saying here is that concepts listed in this subsection shall not be promoted in state government, workplaces, or included as part of any state employee training program. One race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. I'm not going to read all that on the black. I'm going to go over here to the red, just so you can see it, and then you go get the bill for yourself, so you can begin to understand it for yourself. But this is very interesting. An individual, solely by virtue of his or her race or sex, bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex. They're outlawing that. So basically what they're saying is when you began, especially back in 2020, when we had the racial unrest in America, you began to see the notions of anti-racism, systematic oppression, systematic inequalities. You begin to see that language. What this is saying is that you cannot use that language. What this is saying is when we look at our U.S. history, we look at history and we understand that in history there in colonization and slavery and Jim Crow, we understand that there was racism that was embedded within our U.S. history. What they're telling us that we can't speak about that. That's being outlawed in North Carolina. Any individual solely by virtue of his or her race or sex should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress. So what they're saying is that, okay, when you go through diversity training, if it makes somebody feel because they're white, let's say, for example, if we're talking about diversity and we're looking at it from a very narrow perspective, race, and they're saying, okay, well, you know what? If we're talking about race and racism, white people shouldn't feel guilty. We shouldn't do anything, say anything that make, and they're saying anybody with race or sex, but they're really, we got to read between the lines. And basically what they're saying is that you shouldn't come out of there feeling guilty, feeling like, and they're absolutely right. I've not been a part of any kind of training. I've not conducted any training, nor have I been a part of any training where when I walked out, I was like, oh my goodness, I feel guilty. You know, I'm distressed. You know, somebody's blaming me. Now I've been challenged because I've looked at the history and I've understand the history. I've been challenged to read my history. You know what? As a matter of fact, I have been upset and anguished because the history was not taught to me. And so I'm upset at my second grade history teacher, my civics teacher, because they didn't teach me the real history. So I walk out of those trainings, not upset with the trainer or anybody in there, but I'm upset because look, y'all didn't teach me the real history. So context wise, we all have to begin to look at this from a very sober-minded and critical eye. In North Carolina, where we are, at the state government and also in higher education, these laws apply. Now, they don't apply to corporations, to small businesses, to nonprofits, unless you're receiving some type of state funding. Then you may have to look at legal to see. But if you are independent from state funding, these laws don't apply to you. And so we're seeing a lot of leaders, corporate America, small businesses, oh my goodness, I can't do diversity because it's outlawed. No, that's not. Y'all got to read the law and understand it. It says government workplaces. It doesn't say corporate. It doesn't say banking. It doesn't say small business. It says government. So read the lines and don't let them freeze you, because what they're trying to do is freeze everybody, have a chilling effect, if you will, and so that we don't do anything. And we have to really understand what the language is saying to us. I want to do this, then I'm excited to go into Shana and to have some conversation. At the top of the slide, I said 10 considerations. I actually put 12 in here for you. So I want to read for you briefly the 12 considerations. I'm going to read them to you, and then Shana and I, we're going to have a conversation. We'll probably hit all 12 of these considerations. First thing, as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, here are the 12 considerations. They're small, so I'm going to read them to you. First thing, if you're writing notes, belonging is the outcome. That's the first thing I want you to know. Belonging is the outcome. And I'm not going to go through and explain them. We'll probably explain them when Shane and I have a conversation. Second, belonging, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, is the through line to belonging. You cannot get to belonging without looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if y'all go and change the name from diversity, equity, inclusion to something else, understand you can't get to belonging without diversity, equity, inclusion. That's just the reality. DEI is not a program. It is a strategic business priority. Put that in your thinking. It's not a program. It's a strategic business priority. ERGs, employee resource groups, are your hidden gems. Engage in employee resource groups. The organizational culture is the culprit. It's the culture, not the people. It's the culture that's preventing us from reaching the full scale of belonging. Belonging is for everyone, and it's everyone's responsibility. Y'all put that in the chat function. Somebody just put it in the chat function so you remember it. Belonging is for everyone. It's everyone's responsibility. DEI gets stuck in the middle. Basically, DEIB gets stuck in the middle management. And so leaders say we support it. Then when it comes to middle management, it gets stuck in that funnel. Closing equity gaps increases organizational profitability. So when we talk about equity, closing those gaps increases your profitability. So you want to close equity. You want to talk about equity and inequity within your organizations. Organizational assessment is the first step to removing the equity gaps. Remote doesn't mean removed. So when we talk about our remote workers and our hybrid workers, they're not removed from the conversation or removed from creating a sense of belonging. It's not the generation, it's the perspective. So when we're talking about generations in the workplace, we're not blaming the millennials. I know they get everybody want to hit the millennials over the head. It's not the millennials, it's a perspective that they were born into. People with disabilities are the most diverse group of people who sit on the margins of society and our workplaces. Understand that the people with disabilities are the most, because they transcend, people with disabilities transcends race, gender, ethnicity, language, religion, all of the individual diversity. They transcend all of that. And they're the largest group that's diverse. And they are the group that sits on the margins of society and our workplaces. So we need to consider our colleagues, our friends, our folks who have disabilities. These are the 12 considerations as it relates to DEI in 2024. That said, Shana, I'm gonna throw it back to you, and now let's have a conversation.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Will, for sharing all of these. I had spoken with you last week, and I said, one of the areas that I just want to dive into from a trend perspective is this idea that you talked about of this desire to dismantle DE&I. And you talk about the fact that, in the last year, 8 anti-DE&I bills have become law, 65 anti-DE&I bills have been introduced, and there's at least 22 states that are currently weighing these bills. Many aiming to close multicultural and LGBTQ university centers, to forbid employees from providing specific supports. And then we learned about this North Carolina bill that's going to prohibit discussion of systemic racism. I'm interested in your perspective. What has led us to this point?
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I would say this. I believe what's led us to this point, Shana, is in 2020, when we had the racial unrest, we began more so than any other years whenever there was a racial unrest. 2020 was not the first year that we had a racial unrest in our history. And since 1965, and almost 60 years since the Voting Rights Act and all the marches that we had in the civil rights movement. But since that time, 2020 was not the first time, but 2020 was the first time that we saw big businesses say that they're going to begin to become more anti-racist. So this language of anti-racism, this language of white privilege, the language of systematic racism, all of that became more common in everyday talk around diversity, equity, inclusion, or race in America's lexicon, to where I believe that was the beginning of a backlash. And we began to see that backlash around this attack on critical race theory. A theory, y'all, which is something that is taught at the college level, principally in law school, maybe at the graduate school level, but most notably in the law school, a theory that for some reason, folks who are opponents to DEI has said that we're not going to teach this in our K through 12 education. Now, y'all, this is a theory. Right? No kindergarten teachers walking around teaching kindergarten's theory. They're not walking around first grade or second grade teachers not teaching their students critical race theory. So that was just a front for the backlash. And to be honest with you, I believe that the backlash really speaks to something even more fundamental. I say that belonging is something that is fundamental to is a need that every human has. Fear is also an emotion that every human has. And I believe that when we begin to look at history and look at the impacts of history and look at mindsets and look at systems of inequity, systems of oppression, I believe there's a fear that if you get a critical mass of Americans understanding history in its truest sense, that that will begin to have people really say, hey, you know what? We're not doing what we need to do, and we need to come together and begin to work together. And working together is not in the best interest of the 1%. Now, those are just William Lewis's thoughts.
So speaking of the 1%, you mentioned Elon Musk, and Elon Musk is a powerful voice, and he has recently shared a lot of his views on DE&I. And you mentioned one quote that he said that DEI must die. Last month, he also said DEI is just another word for racism. Shame on anyone who uses it. DEI, because it discriminates on the basis of race, gender, and many other factors, is not merely immoral, it's also illegal. Talk to us about this view coming from Elon Musk, and that somehow DE&I is an effort to discriminate, and how as organizations can we create work that is not perceived as immoral and illegal?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that Elon Musk has done, and let's speak about Elon Musk, but also Mark Cuban, another 1%er, came out and said to Elon Musk, no, as another billionaire, you got it wrong. DEI is what we need. That's what helps us to grow and to develop, right? But here's the reality, Shana. I think that what happens is that the word or the phrase or the acronym DEI has been misunderstood. Now, if we look back in our history, we begin to see the first DEI, the word, the acronym, evolved out of something. And it evolved out of the first language that we began to see, which was in 1948 and in 1960s around the desegregation of the U.S. government and U.S. workforce. We begin to see this thing called affirmative action. And affirmative action merely says, this is Will Lewis's Cliff Notes, y'all go look it up for yourself. But affirmative action says that we're going to look at, we know that there's a group of people that have been weighted down and discriminated against in our workforce, in our society. Therefore, we're going to take affirmative action to have some redress related to the inequities that were placed on those groups of people. So affirmative action doesn't say that we're going to give somebody something they don't deserve. It says that we're going to consider the past as it relates to our present and future conditions. That's what affirmative action speaks to, right? Will Lewis's Cliff Notes. Y'all look it up. Y'all can really identify for yourselves. Now, understand this: when we look at history, so the U.S. government was desegregated, was operated in a segregated fashion, and our U.S. military operated in a segregated fashion up until 1946. And President Truman desegregated both the government and the military. Okay, so now when we and from that time forward, there's always been put in place, if we're going to desegregate, how do we create opportunities for people to work together who had not worked together in the past? So what DEI is really about is getting people to be able to work together who have not been able to work together in the past. And it's taken us some 40 years or so to get there, right? And we still, in many times, act like we can't work together in our workforces in 2024. So I believe that Elon Musk and those who follow that trend of thinking either don't understand what diversity, equity, inclusion is all about, or they want to sow division so that all of us do not come together and really work together and advance societal and workplace issues in a way that speaks to inclusion and connectedness and community. Just very, very briefly, let's really level set right now the definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay. So y'all don't, this is Will Lewis Cliff Notes, y'all go look it up. But diversity, when we think about diversity, understand this. Diversity is everybody on this call, no matter what your color is, everybody's diverse. So I'm gonna use myself just for an example. Okay, you look at me, you see a black guy. Yes, a black bald-headed guy, a black guy who wears glasses, a black guy who has a ring on, a black guy who got a little gray in his beard. There's all kind of stuff that you can look at and see that makes me diverse, not just my race. Diversity is the total perspective and spectrum of who I am as an individual. That's diversity. And we need diversity. We need diversity of thought, diversity of perspective, diversity of religion, diversity of gender. All of that is diversity. We're not saying that. So diversity is not a bad thing, y'all. It's not a bad thing. We need difference, right? And this is what we'll find out. We'll find out when we have that difference. We'll find out two things. We'll find out how similar we are to each other, and then we'll also find out that difference allows us to get to the best solutions. Did y'all hear me? The difference allows us to get to the best solution. Equity. And equity is not about giving somebody something that they don't need. And I think in one of the questions, and Shana, if I am preempting your question around equity, you tell me and I'll stop and we'll wait till we come to it. So do I need to stop?
It's a good place. Let's define it.
Okay, equity. So let's look at equity. Equity is the thing that people are beginning to really attack, y'all. So understand this. Let's really level set what equity is. Equity is not about giving somebody something they don't deserve. That's not equity. No. There are two words, equality and equity. Equality, both are needed. Equality, let's look at it like this. Equality is everybody wants an equal opportunity to live this American life, to pursue happiness. Everybody wants the equal opportunity to do that. That's equality, right? And a lot of times when we think about equality, sometimes we say we're going to give everybody the same thing, right? And that may not, that sometimes does not create a sense of equality or equity because not everybody needs the same thing. Equity rather says that we're going to look at people and we're going to give them the things that they need. My sons, I have two sons at home. One is 6 foot, 270 pounds. The other is 5'11", 190 pounds soaking wet. Now, I'm not going to go buy both those boys XXX clothes for the sake of equality. That's not equality. One can't wear the XXX clothes. I'm going to give them equity. So I'm going to buy one the XXX clothes. I'm going to buy the other one medium. That's that's equity, right? So equity is we look at what people, individuals and groups of individuals in our workplaces, we look at what they need and we give them what they need. Let's look at it from this perspective. When we think about and how do we find out if there's any folks or groups of folks who are experiencing inequalities in our organizations? One of the first things we have to do is we have to do an assessment. Okay. So we do an organizational assessment. A lot of people want to go to training first. You don't go to training first. You do the assessment first because the assessment is going to give you some data, actionable data that you can act on. Okay. So let's look at this. Let's take, for example, you have an organization and we're going to put this in race, but we're also going to break it down in different demographics as well. And you'll see that in a minute. But let's just say, for example, we have an organization and we do an assessment of our organization. We want to look at employees' experiences within the organization. So we do an employee engagement survey. And with that employee engagement survey, we look at our numbers, and our numbers tell us that our employees, the majority of our employees are white. We're about 80% of our employee base is white. That's what our numbers tell us, right? Nobody made it up. It's just the facts is who we are. 80% of our employee base is white. Okay, good. All right, now, when we do this assessment on a 5-point scale, 5 meaning great, 1 meaning not so great, on a 5-point scale, our white employees score about a 4.2. Let's just say on this engagement survey, they score about a 4.2, okay? So they established the baseline right there. This is our white employees, baseline 4.2. We still got to go up to 5. We're not at 5 yet. 5 is right here. White employees right here, right? So we still got some room to grow with our white employees. Hold that in your mind. We still got room to grow with our majority employees in terms of their engagement. And when we begin to look at, based on the demographics of our organization and based on our employees' experiences and what they tell us, if we have Black employees, they are right here. Latinx employees are right here. LGBT employees are right here. Veterans are right there. Y'all, there's a weird, can you see there's a gap from the perception of my engagement with the organization? 4.2 is right here. Then other groups, their levels go down. So our job as an organization is to close the gap. That's equity. So equity says I look at the organization, and if I see a gap, even if that gap is white men, yes, I said that. If our data shows a gap that the white men are not having a positive experience, then we're going to deploy resources to those white men so they can have a positive experience. So the goal is to raise everybody to parity. Then guess what? Now we're going to raise everybody to that 5%. That's equity. That's the best I can do without any slides. So I hope that y'all get that. Throw something in the chat function to let me know if that makes sense to you. Put it in the chat if it makes sense. All right, Shana. Woo.
Well, I want to go back to the first conversation you and I ever had, because take me back to 2020. And, I was building a new DE&I program. I was a newly named diversity officer, and I was inundated with all these calls from vendors. And they would start off by telling me, Shana, I know exactly what you need and I can help you with it. And I would leave those conversations thinking, how in the world do they know what I need? I don't know what I need. And so the first time you and I spoke, I was so impressed with your approach, because you started with this idea of we need to assess, we need to learn, and we need to have conversation. And I wanted you to share why that part of the initial starting point is so critical in getting off to success.
Absolutely. Here's the reality, Shana. I think that we have to understand, right? We have to fully understand what's going on. And usually what happens is our first inclination is, when we have a problem or when we see something not working, we say we're going to train. We're going to train it up. We're going to train our employees. We're going to train these folks. And training we need training, but training needs to be appropriately done. And we need to train on the thing that needs to be training for. So what happens, like, for example, we go to the doctor, the doctor says, they ask us, well, how you doing? Do you have a history of? They're looking for data. So when they ask us, do we have a history of? They're trying to figure out if there's a pattern that's connected to us right now, that's connected to our ancestry, connected to our family. And so that data gives them some information that now they can begin to act on. The same way is true here. When we begin to, ask ourselves the question, how are people doing? See, first of all, we can't always assume. We got to ask the question. Let's talk to folks. Let's have a conversation. How are you doing? What is your experience like? And so when we begin to ask those questions, and we put that in the form of a data gathering process, in the form of surveys, and our people are telling us, we don't have to guess any longer. They're telling us, here's my experiences. And when we begin to look at it from different demographics, we can begin to see where within the organization that there are some really gaps. If we just ask the questions without asking demographic information, for example, the 80% of the organization is white, for the most part, if we don't look at the demographics, those who are not white, their answers may be skewed or they may be hidden within the data of the white responses. That's why it's good to begin to look at demographics and break it down from different demographics so you can see if there's any variance. And then that variance helps you to begin to pinpoint. And once we get the data, once we understand, okay, there are gaps, then we still don't go to training first. We may have to do a little bit more fact finding and have some focus groups and ask folks to sit down with us and, hey, you know what, this is what we saw in our organization. We just really want to get a better understanding of it. Let's sit down and hear your thoughts and the focus groups. Then from the focus groups, then we begin to find out where we can really, what the problems really are and begin to point our resources to problems. And so I believe that we have to get the data first and we have to do the focus groups and we have to identify the problems. Then we move to training. So Shana, when we talked 4 years ago, I was like, I cannot tell you that I know what your problems are. I don't know. If you give me a chance to come inside and talk to you and we'll figure it out, then we can put the appropriate training in place. But for me to say, oh yeah, I know the answer to your problem, no, I don't.
You know, another thing that a lot of us who are in this space hear a lot of, and we use as, you know, a motivator for other organizations is that, you know, having DE&I work within an organization is a competitive advantage. And, you know, we like to cite studies. There's a 2012 McKinsey study that found that, you know, organizations with diverse boards had a 95% higher return on equity than those that lack diversity. So we really focus on this economic competitive advantage. If the return on investment with DE&I programs is economically valuable, why are we seeing trends to move away from this investment?
I don't think that people really fully believe that DEI has an economic advantage, to be honest with you. I believe that, and you know what? And here's the reality in this belief. I believe that, although I said the bubble burst, that DEI is not something that's perfect. It's had its own challenges, and so in many things, it's had its challenges. And one of the challenges that I believe that the industry has not done a good job of is showing the needle to move. So we haven't done a good job of collecting data internal to show where we are, where the gaps are, and then continue to follow that through putting some strategies together and then measuring the strategies and then reporting out the outcome. So I think that we've been challenged in that way. I think in many ways, DEI has been more of a public relations type of process. And I'm just being honest, here are my thoughts. Because and this is why I say it's public relations. If you go back to the 12 considerations, I said the DEI is not a program, it's a strategic priority. When you see it as a program, then it could be cut. When you see it as a program, then it becomes a public relations versus a strategic priority is something that we don't go away from. It is something that we pour resources into, we pour money into, we pour staff into. We're going to measure it and we're going to make sure it's successful. And if it's not successful the first time around, then we're going to tweak it to make sure it's successful. So at the end of the day, I believe that we're seeing this retreat from DEI in many ways because folks have not truly I won't even say bought into it. They've not been committed to the long haul work, because here's the reality. DEI is not I say it's not a program. It's not a thing. DEI is about people. And people are nuanced and people are complex. And so when we're talking about people, trying to get people to work together in the workplace, we have to begin to disentangle some of the perspectives, the unconscious bias, the experiences that we've gotten through generations in our families, we have to disentangle that stuff so that when we come into the workplace, we can work as a team. And so the workplace has not been used to doing that type of work. And that type of work is hard work. It's hard work, and it is heart work. And many times in this thing called DEI in the workplace, we want to move away from heart work because we say, oh, that is the fluffy stuff, that's the soft skills. But let's look at this. If I said belonging is the outcome, and belonging, if you call it a soft skill or if you call it a hard skill, the bottom line is that it is a skill. And with any skill, if we're going to develop the skill and we're going to be superior in the skill, that means we need to have a degree of intentionality and commitment to the skill. And so I believe that we just have not seen the commitment in terms of what can be. And what can be, in many ways, we're trying to put forward for the organization what it can be. It's a vision. We're casting a vision for the future. We're saying this is where we are now. So when we look at our data tells us where we are now. And then when we begin to try to close those gaps and bring everybody to parity, that's our future state. And we're not talking about utopia. We're just saying that there's a higher vision for our organization. Again, understand this. Two things that we have to understand. And this is now we're talking corporate, we're talking C-suite language. When we speak about C-suite language, there are two things that C-suite leaders are looking for. A couple of things. One, is it going to cost me money? Is it going to make me money? Is it going to lose me money? That's one of the things. So everything's going to come back to money. Even in nonprofits, we look at the budget. The budget is extremely important. Okay. Secondly, we have to understand this. Leaders, they're looking at getting the top talent in their organizations. They're looking at retaining that top talent. And they're also looking at market shares. What is my market share of this group or that group? And so when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion helps us to get in the top talent. And it also helps us to tap into new markets. So if you put it in that context, top talent and tapping into new markets, now we begin to shift the mindset.
One of the considerations that you shared, that I think it is really a challenge for so many, is this idea that the culture is the culprit. And you've shared with me and with our organization that the aim of culture is to maintain the status quo. How do we shift that? How do we shift that to a culture of belonging when those forces are working against us to maintain where we are?
Oh my goodness. Woo, Shana, you're making me work today. My goodness, I love your questions. I'm working without my slides, y'all. So I hope that y'all can see visually what I'm trying to share with you in your imagination. Think about this right here. I want you all to think about Shana's question. Put this in the chat function. When you think about, and you don't have to talk about your organizational culture, but you can if you want to. But when you think about your organizational culture, if put in the chat function what if I said my organizational culture is a zoo, put in the chat function, what does that mean to you when you hear a zoo? So we're not talking about your culture. We're going to lose the metaphor of zoo. So if I said the organizational culture is a zoo, put in the chat function, what does that mean to you? Colleagues, and let's see what you say. So my organization is a zoo. What does that mean to you? Chaos, a ham, everybody's fenced in. Yes, absolutely. Chaotic. Yes, yes. Bad boundaries. Everyone is focused on their own area. Absolutely. Yes, yes. So that's my organizational zoo. Tunnel vision, chaos. Absolutely. No structure. Absolutely. So when we think about my organization, let's look at it like this. My organization, and this is, everybody uses this one. My organization is a family. Put that in the chat function. Let's put that. What does that mean? My organization is a family. Put that in the chat function. What is that? Bonded. Looking out for one another. We work together. Inclusive, collaborative, tight-knit. Absolutely. And again, bad boundaries. Maria, Pat, thank you for that, because I was going to bring that up. Although we are family, families sometimes can be dysfunctional. I don't know about you, but I know about me. There's dysfunction all in my family. And so families can be dysfunctional for sure. My organization is a team. Last one, put that in the chat function. My organization is a team. And y'all just bear with me. I'm answering Shana's question. Y'all helping me with that. So just bear with me. My organization is a team. Everybody knows their role. We work towards the same goal, collaborative, work towards a common goal. Collaborative, everyone matters, absolutely. Common purpose, yes. So when we think about, y'all keep it coming, but when we think about organizational culture, the mental model on how we see our organizational culture impacts how we engage with each other in the culture. So if we have a mental model of the organizational culture as a zoo, as a family, as a machine, as a team, as a jungle, as a prison, that mental model is going to dictate how we operate within the organizational culture. Understand this, the organizational culture, as Shana said, it wants to maintain the status quo. Organization, the culture, has taken on a life of its own. It's interesting because the organizational culture is made up of individuals, is made up of all of us. And then collectively, the organization develops a culture. If you're in a very complex organization, let's say colleges and universities or a multinational organization, you're going to have a main culture, and then you're going to have many subcultures within the context of that organization. So within the organization itself is to maintain the status quo. That's why it's been successful. Organizations do not like change. Organizational culture does not like to change. It likes to maintain the status quo because it's looking out for its own self-preservation. When you come up to the organization and say, we want to change, it says no. So imagine this, you went to a training. Imagine you leave this conversation. You're like, oh my goodness, Dr. Lewis was so great. And the questions that Shana asked was so great. And I learned so much. I'm going to take this back to my organization and we're going to make change. And you go back to take these notes back and you try to implement something that we said. And you hit a brick wall. And you're like, oh, what they said didn't work. Or you like, the people in my organization don't like me or they don't like it. It's not the people. It's not what we said. It's the culture. The culture doesn't want to change. The culture is very complex. You have leadership, you have management, you have strategies, you have processes, you have roles and responsibilities, you have identity, everybody's identities and values. All that comes within the organization. And that all that makes up the culture. So it's very complex. And so it's hard to move. So what we have to do in terms of creating a culture of belonging is we have to begin to get a critical mass of people within the organization to begin to think about the innovation, DEI, belonging, to change the language or to incorporate the language in their day-to-day behaviors, in their day-to-day actions. And then that begins to push the organization to begin to make subtle changes. And what we're looking for are subtle changes within the organization that eventually the organization begins to change on its own. That's the best way I can explain that. Y'all put that in the chat function if it made sense to you. And Shana, if it made sense to you, let me know. If it's not, I'll try to explain it again.
Well, I'm going to jump on this, this culture belonging. And your consideration, one of your considerations is belonging is for everyone and it's everyone's responsibility. But what do you do in the case where employees don't feel like they belong? And whether that's in their department or in their organization, how can they own their own belonging when they don't feel it?
Absolutely. So, and here's the thing that I really, as I've talked, and y'all as a thought leader, my job is to think about this stuff, talk to other people, listen, read, and then think about it again, and sometimes even make adjustments, right? So here's a thought of an adjustment. I say that belonging is for everyone, and it's everyone's responsibility. Well, one of the reasons why belonging is for everyone, and I put an emphasis on that, is because the way that diversity, the word diversity, has been interpreted. It's been interpreted in two ways. The definition has been very broad. So when I ask people, what's the definition of diversity? They want to say it's broad. It means this, it means that. But the application has been narrow. And so when I say, well, what's the first thing that comes to mind when I ask you about diversity? The first thing that comes to people's minds is not broad, but it's narrow. It's usually race and gender and sexual orientation, religion. And so you have a broad definition, narrow application. When we come to, and that's one of the challenges for diversity. That's one of the pushbacks that we're seeing. But when it comes to belonging is that thing that every human being needs. It's a fundamental need. If you fact check me, go to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you're going to see the hierarchy, and you're going to see that belonging is the third from the top, if you will, as relates to what every human being, no matter their race, creed, color, who you are, everybody has a need to belong. Okay. So within the organization, I have a sense to belong in the organization, and that sense of belonging is my responsibility, and it's the organization's responsibility. So when I talk about having a sense of belonging, yes, a lot of times I talk about organizational culture, but I also remind people that it's your responsibility as well. So that means that I'm going to come in here and I'm going to open myself up to say, y'all hired me. I said I want to come to the organization. So how can I belong to the organization? Do I wear the swag? Do I talk to people? Y'all, I remember when I was early in my career at Indiana University, and I was at the business school, the Kelley School of Business. And at that time, I'm not sure if the demographics have changed or not, but at that time, the Kelley School was majority white in terms of its student population and majority white in terms of its faculty population. Now, I was a staffer at the time. We had a Christmas party. Y'all know y'all remember before the pandemic when we used to have Christmas parties? And so we had this Christmas party, and for those that don't celebrate Christmas, holiday parties or any other party where you brought people together. But at that time, it was called a Christmas party. So we had a Christmas party. And so I was in line waiting to get, and we had this food catered, so it was pretty good. So it wasn't a dry turkey. It was some good food there. So I was in line waiting to get the food. And one of my good friends came by me, white guy, and he said, "Will, my goodness, you are in a sea of white and you look like you're isolated." I looked around and he was right. From I was right here in the middle, and everybody in the back of me was white, and everybody in the front of me was white. And I was like, man, you were absolutely right. And this was my first year in this position. I said to him, I said, "You're right. I am in a sea of white, and I do feel isolated." But I said, check this out. This time next year, I still may be in a sea of white, but I will not be isolated. And the reason I will not be isolated is because I'm going to get to know everybody in front of me and in back of me, and I'm going to get to know this organization. So what we have to do as it relates to creating a sense of belonging, we have some responsibility to create that for ourselves within the organization. Now, we also have a responsibility to point out the inequities within the organization and to share, hey, this something's not right here. So you got that responsibility, but you also have a responsibility to create your own sense of belonging, because it's your responsibility within the organization. So Shana, I believe that both the organization has a responsibility of creating that sense and that culture, and I have a responsibility of engaging, and also engaging is going to the game, going to the events, wearing the swag, and engaging is also me creating a sense of belonging within the context of my work teams. I don't have to wait for the leader. I don't have to wait for an edict to come down from leadership. I don't have to wait for my supervisor to say, okay, y'all, we're going to do the sense of belonging right now. No, I can simply say to my colleagues, hey, how y'all doing? Can I take you out for coffee? Can I have a Zoom conversation with you? Can I get to know you? I don't need nobody to tell me how to create a sense of belonging. I just do it.
How does that extend beyond your organization into the community? And what are some best practices for those of us who want to more deeply engage and belong, not only with where we work, but where we live, where we worship, where our kids go to school?
Absolutely. Here's the best practice, the supreme best practice of all the practices for me, right? This is Will Lewis. Y'all may see something else out there, but this is me. Number one thing to do is to have conversations. That's the first thing to do, because in our workplaces, in our communities, we tend to live and play with folks that we're most familiar with. And we go to services, if we go to services in places where we're most familiar with, and that's usually folks that looks like us, right? And so what we have to do is we have to walk beyond ourselves and take the courage to walk beyond ourselves and say, you know what, I'm gonna get to know somebody different today in my community. I'm gonna go to a different place of worship in my community. I'm going to engage with and be deliberate and expanding my friend group beyond the friend group that I have now to include more difference, whatever that difference is. That's a best practice. That's a daily practice. That's a life practice. Here's the reality. When I approach my life with a posture of curiosity, a posture that I want to know you and get to understand you, I'm going to approach it with four things: grace, mercy, empathy, and love. And love is above all of them, because I don't need you to love me in order for me to love you, because I love you at the humanity of you. So I'm talking about the agape love. I'm talking about that love of you, the humanity. You don't have to do anything for me to love you, your humanity. When I walk in that space of grace, mercy, empathy, and love, and I'm have a healthy degree of curiosity, and I'm beginning to walk beyond the places that I'm familiar with. Now I begin to experience the world differently, and the world begins to experience me differently. In my community, I am not a native of Winston-Salem. I've been here at Winston-Salem for 8 years now. And Winston-Salem has offered me the opportunity, more so than the other communities that I've been in, that connects to me, makes me feel more at home, just like I felt in Indianapolis. So I'm from Indianapolis, and in my early career, I engaged in the community. I engaged in the things that I felt passionate about, the things that I wanted to work on to help humanity, to help society, to help my community. So one of the things that we can do, and Leadership Winston-Salem, everybody that's on this call, you're doing it. Continue to do it. Continue to look for those things that you're passionate about and engage. Come off of the sidelines and walk in love and talk with people and figure out that thing that you're passionate about. There is something in Winston-Salem that you can work on, that you can engage, that you can be a part of. And that is a best practice, is just to do it from a community perspective.
So you talk about the fact that it takes some courage to do this. And, one of the questions that just came in is talking about, all of the terms that are used to describe identities. And so many folks that I talk to are afraid of getting it wrong. And they come to me and they say, Shana, should I say Black or African American? Should I say Hispanic or Latinx? Should I say she, him, they, Z? How can we get it right as we work to demonstrate respect and inclusion?
Absolutely. You get it right by getting it wrong. That's the reality of it, Shana. We cannot be stuck in our heads and say, and I'm not gonna talk. I can't do it because I'm gonna say something wrong. Oh, they're gonna see me like a racist. Oh my goodness. No. Success never happens when we're with success. Success happens. We learn from our mistakes. That's how we become successful. And so we cannot be in a place to where we're afraid to make mistakes. We have to be in a place where we have humility. There's this whole notion called cultural humility. Cultural humility speaks about the fact that I don't know you. I cannot pretend to know your background, your culture. So therefore, I'm going to be humble enough to ask you. I'm going to be humble enough to engage with you and to learn from you. I cannot pretend that I know everything about you. So we have to practice cultural humility. Y'all go look it up. That's just Will Lewis's Cliff Notes, okay? But when we think about this, part of, in my mind, how I look at cultural humility, it goes back to grace, mercy, empathy, and love. And let me break those down for you, just because this is when it talks about I want to call somebody something that they're not, and I'm afraid. Well, you know what? If all of us, well, I got to start with me first, and then as I start with me first, and as I engage with people, I try to help people to understand. Hey, you know what? If we both can engage in conversation this way, let's just see how it works. But with me first, when I approach the conversation, I'm going to approach it with grace. That what grace is, that's something you did not earn. That is something that you there's no leverage there. You didn't earn it. I'm just going to give it to you because I love you, because I have compassion for you as a human being. I'm not going to jump into this conversation with an assumption that you are meaning to hurt me. I am going to jump in the conversation with giving you the benefit of the doubt. Therefore, I'm going to have grace. Mercy means that I'm going to restrain from verbally laying you out. You said something that I didn't appreciate, and nope, I'm gonna give you mercy. I'm gonna restrain. Empathy means I'm going to walk with you. I can't walk in your same shoes, but I can walk with you. If I may not have had a dog that passed away. By the way, I did have a dog that passed away, but I may not have had a dog that passed away. You have. I don't know what that experience is, but I've experienced pain. I've experienced sorrow. So empathy says I'm gonna walk beside you and comfort you in the context of the whatever you're experiencing. If it's pain, if it's joy, I'm going to rejoice with you, right? That's empathy. And love means that I'm going to you don't have to do anything to deserve it, but I love your humanity. Therefore, I'm not going to belittle you. I'm not going to dehumanize you. I am going to listen to you, even though if I don't agree with you, I still don't have to dehumanize you. And that's something that in today's society with our politics, we're getting it all wrong. We believe we got to dehumanize people when we disagree. No, I don't agree. But that don't mean I got to demonize you and dehumanize you, right? So when we think about the names, the pronoun usage, and I was talking to a colleague, and if I'm African American or Black, if it's Caucasian or white, if it's Hispanic X, Chicano, all these words to describe people are fluid. And the best thing to do is to ask people. That's the best thing to do. Therefore, I don't got to guess. Shana, do you go by pronouns? Yes or no? And if you do, you're going to tell me which ones that you want to use. Shana, is a Caucasian American? Is it Jewish American? What tell me what it is. And that's what we do is we begin when we have personal interactions with people, ask the question. If you ask the question out of genuine sincerity, they're gonna answer. And therefore we'll have to assume, and we'll have to be frozen in our heads like, oh my goodness, I don't know if I should call them a he or they or she. They're gonna tell you. My name is William.
You talk about love. My mom used to always say, people will forgive a lot if they love you. And so if you think about, building relationships with folks, if you build relationship, you have the opportunity to get to know them and to be able to have vulnerable, courageous, scary conversations to say, I want to get it right. Help me to get it right. But first, I feel like that aspect of, leading with grace, mercy, empathy, and love, and building the relationship so that you can work together.
Shana, and if y'all don't believe me, you go to LinkedIn and look at one of my posts. I was with a client yesterday, global orientations, and we're working together. We did a kind of an unconscious bias experience, and talked to them about unconscious bias. And the next thing that we did was we co-created an activity called Let's Talk. And Let's Talk was an activity where and we started off with their diversity council, but they want to take it to the entire staff. And they're a small organization, about 60, 70 people or so. But what Let's Talk is in there, and they also across their global corporation. Let's Talk paired folks who are not familiar with each other in the workplace. And for 3 weeks, we had some curated questions that they would sit and talk with each other about. They would ask, "What's your favorite food? You know, what's your perspective on the world? You know, what are your values? What are the values of the organization?" So they just kind of really, we had some prompts to help them in the conversation. They did this for 3 weeks. They were also the journal. You know, how was the experience? How was it get to knowing someone that you didn't know? And yesterday was the conclusion of the formal let's talk piece, and we did we looked at that and began to have some conversation about it. Here are 4 things that came from that conversation, 4 takeaways. And again, I've kind of shared these takeaways with you all, but this is what the staff. So y'all were talking about promising practices and the things that I can do within my organization. This is what one organization did just as of yesterday. So not research, not something that you can do this right now. They said DEI is not about programs, it's about people. Pausing your daily formal conversations to engage in less formal, non-work conversations increases trust and knowledge of your team members. When we suspend assumptions and have authentic conversations, we learn that we have a lot in common with each other. And then it's okay to see people as human in the workplace, and we should show up with grace, mercy, empathy, and love. This organization took the time to have deliberate conversations with each other. And I got chill bumps when we were in the debrief yesterday, because it was like, yes, that's exactly. And people were like, this one colleague said that she walked into the conversation with assumptions about her other colleague. And what she found out is that they had more in common than what she really thought. And this is someone that is US based and someone that's based outside of the US, right? So when you're talking about a promising practice and you're talking about how do we bring this to life inside of our organizations, take a pause. Engage with your colleagues in conversation. Get to know them. Shana, to your point, if I love you, I'm gonna give you more grace. Mm-hmm. What usually happens in our work relationships is because we don't know each other that well. Whenever we're faced with some type of critical situation, some type of situation where we disagree with each other, we engage in war with each other. And so one side got to win, the other side has to lose. And then we escalate that up to you, Shana, to the DEI and the HR person to resolve the issue. Where if we just would have taken the time to talk with each other before the crisis, mm-hmm. then we can listen to each other during the crisis, and we can help each other heal after the crisis. Take the time to engage with each other. This is not rocket science, y'all.
I have just one last question, and then I'm going to open it up because I see some questions coming into the chat, and I know that everyone listening today has questions. So I encourage you to start putting those in the chat or get ready to ask. But my last question, I want to go back to, one of your considerations was employee resource groups are hidden gems. And oftentimes employee resource groups, they're really aimed, their focus is on helping foster belonging and development. But there are employees who feel like they actually fracture unity, and they can be divisive because it's calling out how some employees are different than the whole. How would you describe the aims of effective employee resource groups, and how can they work to achieve inclusion and avoid being exclusionary?
Absolutely. I think that employee resource groups, one, whatever activities that they engage with, open it up. Open up for the entire organization to come and learn and to understand the activities. I just recently, Shana, just had a chance to visit with your employee resource group there at Allegacy, Sankofa, which is your African-American employee resource group. They had a Black History Month celebration talking about health and inequities in health and inequities in banking. They opened it up. So it wasn't just for African Americans, it was for all. And so when we began to open it up and we're allowing opportunities for people to understand things from different perspectives, then that helps us all, right? I think also the employee resource group, coming back to data, if we have data that can help us to say, you know what, here's the reasons why we have this employee resource group. The data says that this group of employees do not feel like they belong. They do not feel, they feel like they're on the margins. And so we want to make sure that they feel more connected. And here's the reality. There's nothing to say that you can't have more than one employee resource group. And so if your data points it out, or if employees say, hey, you know what, I want to start an employee resource group for your folks. And so I think that employee resource groups are hidden gems because not only do they create sources of belonging for those employees that may feel like they're on the margins of your organization, but employee resource groups also can be a source of innovation and strategic thinking, and could be a mini think tank for your organization as you think about tapping into new markets that you hadn't tapped into before.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I loved hearing from you. And I know there's questions coming in. So I want to turn us to the chat and grab some of these questions. One of them that we started talking about, was the idea of so many terms used to describe identities and the most appropriate. We talked about, being in relationship to being able to ask, but, will identities continue to evolve, and why do they do that?
You know what, I think that it's very interesting. I think over time we will see, and especially I will speak very specifically. I think, for example, some identities are there. African American and Black. I think that's there. That's evolved from the '60s and from the slavery and all that stuff. I think that's there. The identity that I think that is continuing to evolve, which is being very fluid, is how we see sex, gender, and sexual identity. So I think that continues to evolve, if you will. I don't know where it's going to stop, when it's going to stop, but I think that we're going to still begin to kind of think about identity in that way, which actually that also impacts how we see family. And so our definitions of family and what makes a family unit, that's evolving from the 1940s and 50s, if you will. So that definition is evolving because now you, with the evolution and evolving of identity in terms of people, how people see themselves from their sexual identity, sexual expression, their sex and their gender, that changes how the family composition happens as well.
Mm-hmm. Another question that came into the chat was, how do you measure the success of DEIB initiatives within an organization to be able to speak about the value to leadership?
You have to first do the assessment. And so it's come back to that. So the assessment gives you the baseline. Once you establish a baseline, then you can measure from the baseline. So that means you have to assess, then you put some strategies in place, then you reassess to see if the strategies took hold and if there's change. And then that reassessment now shows you if the delta, shows you if things went up, if they went down, if they stayed the same. And you continue to tweak it. So it's not an easy strategy, but I just gave you the formula. The formula is assessment first, then strategy, then reassess. Now you begin, when you establish the baseline from assessment, you put the strategy in, you reassess. Now you begin to see where the deltas move. So a lot of people say, well, we did that diversity thing last year, nothing changed. It's not going to change. You did it last year. You didn't give no time for anything to work through the organizational culture, because what we're trying to change is the culture. Y'all trying to get those quick fixes. Oh my goodness, people, they're not going to say anything good about you until they feel it within the culture. And so that's a longer term endeavor.
What are your thoughts on organizations changing the titles of DE&I leaders to keep them from being targeted?
Here's the reality. The reality is that we're in the last year, we saw a huge wave of laws come across our society, United States, 22 states. And they outlawed many of them outlawed offices for diversity and inclusion. Some did not. Now we're seeing a new crop of laws come out, and they learned from last year. And what they're doing is they're being very, very specific in terms of what you can and cannot say and do, and the words that you can and can't use. I think it was in Texas where there was a crew that went under with that had hidden cameras, and they were talking to the diversity folks, or the folks who used to work in diversity. And on camera, the folks was like, well, you know what, we're still doing it. We're just doing it under a different name. And so that data now is being weaponized to say, okay, we're going to strengthen the laws to where you can't do it at all. But here's the reality. The reality is this right here. We got to keep the first thing first. And we cannot let this rhetoric stop us from helping people reach their full potential. That's the first thing first, is helping people within your organization to reach their full potential. So if you do it under the banner of diversity, equity, inclusion, if you do it under the banner of access, if you do it under the banner of engagement, if you do it under the banner of development or belonging, quite frankly, I don't care. I'm not married to diversity, equity, and inclusion because I know what my assignment is. My assignment is helping people to reach their full potential. And when I look at my data, if I have one group that is not performing as good as another group, then I'm going to dedicate some resources to help them get to the place where we're all performing. So don't be afraid. Continue to advance in your organizations diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's nothing illegal for you to do it from a corporate standpoint, from a non-profit, from a business standpoint. And so I say you continue. But if you are more cautious, then you don't abandon the mission. Just change the words, but don't abandon the mission.
Do you think there is a benefit to reconsidering some of the titles in order to better reach everyone? I know, the fact that as we come together today, it is necessary for us to define DE&I. Does that mean that there are folks in our organizations who are not with us today, who are shutting their ears, that they don't want to hear those definitions, so they don't understand? And if we use terms like access or engagement or belonging, we might have a better chance of reaching them?
I believe that there are folks that we cannot reach no matter what titles you change. That's just the bottom line. Now, to shed some light on this, right before the pandemic in 2018, 2019, I had the opportunity to work for Tech. And in that capacity, I was able to create my own job description and my own title. And in creating that title, because my title before that at Virginia Tech and other universities, it was Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I saw back in 2018 and even before that, hey, belonging is where we really need to be. So in that title that I changed for myself, I said, you know what? I'm going to be the special assistant to the president for belonging, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I led with belonging. So understanding that belonging is the outcome, and I led with belonging and kept DEI because DEI is the through line to belonging. You cannot get to belonging without considering diversity. You cannot get to belonging without looking at equity. You cannot get to belonging without looking at spaces of inclusion. Because if we just said that everybody belongs, but people still feel like there's inequities, then not everybody belongs. So we have to look at inequities within our organization. We have to create an organization where there's diversity of people, and we have to look at inclusion. And a definition for inclusion quickly is not about inviting people to the dance. It's really about inviting people to plan the dance. So inclusion is really about giving people power and authority that usually didn't have the power and authority within our organizations. Whew.
Excellent. Any other questions for Dr. Lewis? I've had some great ones come through the chat. Thank you so much for sharing those, but I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to ask him anything that is still on our minds.
And Shana, while people are asking and thinking about their questions, I want to invite everybody to take out your phone, scan this QR code, and give me some feedback on the presentation, on your thoughts, and then you can download a report about belonging that helps you to understand what belonging is that me and my team put together last year. But as you're thinking about your questions, if you have any, I would invite you to, if this was of value to you, fill out some of the questions to give me some feedback as well. I really appreciate it. And then continue to put your questions for us in the chat if you have any. Thank you, Shana.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Lewis, it is always a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to talk with you. I learned so much today. So many of these topics are, timely and important, and considerations that all of us, whether we're in DEIB roles or not, need to embrace as part of our ongoing our ongoing work and our ongoing life in the community. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. I'm going to turn it back now to Frida and Catherine, and just share thank you so much for allowing us to be here.
Thank you, Will and Shana, for being with us today and with your time and your insights, as well as to each of our attendees who are invested in diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging in our community. It is recruitment season for Leadership Winston-Salem. If this webinar struck a chord with you and you would like to know what all your friends and families and colleagues have been investing their time in, please register for information. The link to register is being put in the chat now. If you're already an alum and know someone who would love to experience Leadership Winston-Salem, please go to our website, click Nominate a Candidate button, and use the link that Jared just shared in the chat. Just a reminder that Leadership Winston-Salem is a nonprofit organization that relies heavily on the support of individual donors and corporate sponsors to provide the array of programming that we do. If you enjoyed what we offered today, you're invited to make a contribution on our website or by clicking on the link that was entered into the chat. Many thanks to each of you for joining us today. Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.